Hello, and welcome to another brand new episode of the Scared Silence podcast with me, your host, Paul Richards. I hope you've been enjoying season 2 so far. On episode 1, I spoke to the brilliant Nation of Language, and on last week's episode, I sat down with the author and journalist John Ronson. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the filmmaker Mark Jenkin. He first broke through with Bait in 2019, a hand-processed black and white portrait of a fishing community under pressure, which won him the BAFTA for Outstanding Debut. He followed it with Ennis Men, a piece of Cornish folk horror that premiered at Cannes, and this year he's released one of my favourite films, Rose of Nevada, starring George MacKay and Callum Turner. They play two fishermen who take a job on a boat that vanished at sea 30 years earlier, only to find themselves pulled somewhere they never expected. He joined me in the studio in London for our conversation.
Hello, thank you.
How are you today, Mark?
Yeah, good. Exhausted.
Exhausted?
Yeah, we performed last night, so...
Yeah, so you're at the BFI IMAX doing a live score of Rose of Nevada.
Yeah, first time we've done it. We ran it at 2:30, just for ourselves. First time we'd run it through, and then last night was only the second time we've ever even played it the whole way through, so it was great, but it was exhausting emotionally, which is why I'm wearing glasses, because my eyes are so tired. I'm not trying to look like Bono, just absolutely knackered.
Do you get nervous for those things?
Yeah, but it's a weird sort of nervousness that I think nerves is about sort of uncertainty, but because you're just sort of on a train and 7:30 or 7 o'clock we started playing when the house opened, and we sort of noodled around for half an hour. Sort of as soon as we play the first note, we're on it until the film finishes. So it's a weird sort of anxiety that I don't feel nervous at the time, but afterwards you kind of become aware of how much you've been sort of holding in terms of anxiety, and then stayed awake all night because the adrenaline's still running and all that kind of stuff.
I get it with DJing. I've been DJing for 20 years now, and I still get nervous before DJing.
Yeah.
Even though I've done it a million times and it's like riding a bike.
Yeah.
I think it's the bit leading up to it. Once you're doing it, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I find it quite draining afterwards.
Yeah.
And again, you
completely.
think you'd get used to it, but in a way, I think the nerves are good because you're hopefully doing something you care about. You want to get it right.
Yeah.
I think it's always a good sign.
Well, I remember what Tom York said about stage fright and the advice that Michael Stipe gave him. It was just just to take yourself out of your body and imagine that it's not happening to you, which he obviously wrote a very famous song about. But so that was what I thought about. We had like half an hour between doing the run and then doing the actual performance, where we both, myself and Dion, who was doing it with me, we both went back to the hotel kind of separately, and that was what I was thinking about while I was sat in the hotel. And and then I thought I then went back to the venue very quickly. I thought I actually don't want to be on my own now. I want to go back and sort of just acclimatise to the space. So yeah, I mean, it's such a relief to get it done.
Yeah,
because you kind of prove to ourselves that we can do it.
Yeah.
So now we can be a bit more not relaxed about it, because it's dangerous to get relaxed about it. But to be a bit more right, we can do it. So now we can play with it a little bit more, and we can push it a little bit more, and because it's the thing is with a film. Once you've made a film, it's the same every time somebody sees it. But with this, you got to lean into the fact that we can do it differently each time now. And when we did it before for my previous film, Ennis Men, it was always different because the venues were always different. So the mix was always different. So you were sort of, the context changes all the time because it's live. So that's the really exciting bit of it, I think.
So how do the performances adapt each time then? Do you and Dion have a discussion before about the space and how you might want to react to that? No,
not really.
No?
We just tend to go in and just see what the space is like, really. Sometimes, like we were in the IMAX last night, so it doesn't get better than that. So we were kind of, we were working with a big sound team there who were brought in to kind of design the overall sound in the space, because the film's coming out of the theatre speakers, and then we're coming out of a P&A and all of that kind of stuff. So the smaller venues, it's a little bit more lo-fi. So it's as much to do with the people that you're working with as well, who's mixing it on the day, how much responsibility we take and how much responsibility we hand over to other people.
How did the two of you come to work together?
We, Yeah, well, we're very good friends, and Dion's always collaborated with me on my films to do the artwork. But we'd always kind of shared the interest in sort of analog music and synths, and it always talked about doing something. But quite often life gets in the way, and you talk about doing stuff, and you never get around to doing it. And I think with Ennis Main, I was offered the chance to do the live score. My first film, Bait, the score was performed live. I did the score on the film and on the record, but then I was offered the chance to do the score live, and I said no because I was just too terrified to perform it. And also, I don't remember what I recorded on the score. I can't write music, so I had no way of writing down what I'd done on the original Bait score, and I'd done it with a tape loop, and so it was all quite unique. So it couldn't be replicated. So actually, I asked my friend Gweno to do that. So she came and did it, and with some strings from Georgia Ellery, who is from Black Country New Road, and Jockstrap, who's also in the film. So they did the score themselves, with no input from me. And I saw them do that, and it was amazing because I was watching my own film, but with some separation because it had a different score, and it was like watching somebody else's film. So that was amazing. So then I did the music for Ennis Main again, and then I was offered the chance to do live score. So I thought, actually, that looked like so much fun when Gwen did it that I wanted to do it. But there's no way I wanted to do it on my own. So I said to Dion, maybe this is the chance when we do something together. So we reworked the score and toured it in like 3 years ago, whenever it was when it came out. So it was a no-brainer to do it again on this one, you know, because that was the other thing when I walked up onto, you know, this time we're playing when the house opens, so we don't get introduced and walk up and start playing. You know, we're there first, so I remember last night walking up onto the stage. So there was nobody in the audience. I walked up, and Dion was there, and I just thought, thank God, I'm not doing this on my own. It's so nice to do it with somebody. So yeah, that's how it kind of came about, quite organically, but actually having the offer to do something formalized it.
It's the second time I've seen Rosa Nevada. I was lucky to see a preview at the BFI, and then I was there last night watching the live score, and I was trying to remember the music from the film from the first time.
So were we.
Yeah, and how much the performance was differing from it. I thought from the live score, there were definitely some elements of Noi in there. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Kind of reminded me of Issy by Noi.
Right, don't know it.
A bit kind of krautrocky, and there was a bit of Eno discrete music at times. So I was just kind of wondering, did you guys want to stay loyal to the original score, or was it more about improvising in the moment, or
it's both, really?
Yeah,
it's both. I think we have to, from my point of view as the composer of the original score, there's bits that are so integral to the way the film works, because I don't think of myself as a musician. I do the sound design, and I work with a sound guy as well, Ian Wilson, who mixes everything and designs the sound with me. But the score for me is part of that. The score isn't kind of laid over the top. I don't consider myself a composer. My score is very much part of the sound design. And Ian always jokes to me that I'm the only composer that he works with who's constantly asking for the music to be turned down in the mix, because I want the sound design to be holistic rather than it being sound design and music. So there's some bits of the film that really have to work with the music, and there's some themes that I really like. So the initial theme that comes in, the guitar theme that kind of plays throughout in its different iterations, is kind of set in my mind. But then, you know, Dion comes in with all of his ideas as well, and it would be mad for me to kind of get somebody else to come in and then say, right, you need to play exactly what I played. Because also I like the fact that, you know, Dion plays stuff that I can't do. You know, he's much more musical than me, and so adds a kind of a fuller sound to it. It's quite difficult to articulate, but like, yeah, sort of like I think it's more emotive live, the live score version. And you know, there's influences that you mentioned. I think some of that comes from just the kit that we use, you know. But I mean, my starting point is Discrete Music by Eno.
There you go.
That's the greatest piece of music that's ever been recorded.
Side one, yeah.
Side one, yeah.
Side two gets a bit.
Yeah, well, side two is almost like a completely different record. It's not in the same. It's not in the same sort of vibe space, is it?
No, it's much more orchestral.
Yeah. You don't. It's not a record that you flip over. You either listen to side A or you listen to side B, depending on what kind of space you're in. But that was always my intention with music has always been to basically re-record Discrete Music. Two things stop me from being able to do that. One is a lack of talent, which I'm not saying that as a negative thing, a lack of musical talent. And the other thing is the way that he recorded it. He could never record that again. That's the beauty of it. That was a one-off. And he could set up everything up in exactly the same way, play it exactly the same way, and it would sound different. So I always aim for that, you know. And that's what the Bait soundtrack was. I was aiming for Discrete Music. And the reason there's Bait never meant to have any music on it at all. It was not going to have any score because I thought I don't want anything on there to be pulling on the heartstrings in a sonic way. I wanted it to be really upfront and it to be the emotion to come from watching these characters and listening to these characters, nothing else on top of it. But there was so much Foley that I had to do on that film that I couldn't be asked to do. I thought I'm going to just drop some drones in. And my first thought was I'd put in something from Eno just to fill those gaps. But at the same time, I was having a bit of a tough time sort of mentally making that film. It was a long post-production process because I spent 3 months hand processing the negative before I started editing. And at that point, nobody knew who I was and nobody was waiting for that film. So every day I was thinking, what the hell am I doing with my life in the studio? It was the depths of winter. And I needed something that wasn't filmmaking to do to take my mind off that at certain times in the studio. And Gweno said, I've just bought this amazing little Korg Volca Keys synthesizer. And it was like £100 or something. So I was like, I might buy one of them and just play around with it. And as soon as I started playing around with it, I thought, actually, I won't drop Eno stuff in. I'll kind of create my own drones just to put in the film to fill these gaps where I couldn't be bothered to do the Foley. And then eventually I would replace it with Foley and get rid of the music. But I sort of fell in love with the sounds that I was making with the synthesizer. So yeah, Discrete Music is a massive thing. And I think also at that time, I just read that Bowie, when he was having a complete mental collapse, had I don't know what era this was. I think it was like when he was in Berlin, maybe
with the Iggy Pop.
Yeah, and he just used to listen to Discrete Music over and over again to ease his anxiety. And so I think part of that was I would just play it all the time. It was almost like meditation for me listening to that record. And I think it sort of seeped in. And also that was the other thing on the back of the record. It's got the diagram of how he recorded it, right? With the tape, with the Frippertronic tape machines and all that kind of stuff. And like, you know, a reverb unit, the EQ and the tape machines. And I thought, well, if I come from music from that angle, from a technical angle, you know, like sort of King Tubby, like Lee Scratch Perry kind of actually looking at the mechanics of it before the music, then I'm much more comfortable than that. That's why, like I said, like walking in here and seeing I'm so intimidated by, even though I played guitar last night in front of 500 people, that's the first time I've ever played guitar publicly.
Oh,
and
really?
I'm so intimidated by people who are good musicians and who could play guitars and stuff. So I'm much happier hiding behind tape machines and stuff, which when we did Ennis Main was much more, you know, I had a little the Korg, the it was the Volca keys that I was just playing and 2 tape machines. And so I'd play a couple of notes and play it into the tape loop, and then it was just a tape loop, and suddenly I was like, you know, it wasn't about music, it was about processing something on a tape. This time I felt much more exposed because I've got a guitar in my hands, and I have to keep reminding myself, play what you know how to play. You're not Dave Gilmour. This isn't. Don't start bending notes, you lunatic. You know, maybe in 20 years' time when I've actually learned how to play it properly.
So did doing the film scores come more out of a necessity for you?
Yeah, and the first, like Reg from Invader, he messaged me on Instagram after he saw Bait, and said, I saw the film, I loved the film. How would you feel about us putting the original, the score out as a record? And I was like, yeah, amazing. And he said, but who did it? There's no credit on the film. And I said, well, I did it. And he said, why isn't it credited? And I said, because I was sort of a bit embarrassed about it. One, because I didn't want to be putting myself out there as a musician, as a composer. But also I already had a credit as writer, director, cinematographer, editor, sound designer, all of that. And now I'm going to do the music as well. So I didn't have a credit on it. But he just said, yeah, we want to put it out. And they put it out on record and on cassette as well, because I recorded it all on tape. So they said, put it out on tape as well in its most natural form. And it did, it did really well. And critically, it was reviewed and stuff, and critically it did really well. And then that went totally to my head, because like the sort of like 15-year-old me who always wanted to be a rock star suddenly had a record out. So then when I was doing the next film, which was Ennis Main, which we were developing during the lockdown, where I had a lot of time on my hands, when I should have been writing the film and prepping for when the film was going to be shot after the lockdown, I was in the studio recording music for it, because suddenly I thought, oh wow, I've got this like sort of record deal, because by then Reg just said, oh, we'll probably put the next score out as well. So it completely went to my head, and I was making music and forgetting about the film. And I had to have a sit down and have a serious talk with myself that you're not somebody who's got a record deal because of your music. You're somebody who's made some music as part of the sonic world of the films that you've made, and as a result, Invader Records have put your records out. You're not gonna have a Christmas number one. You're making sort of music that's part of a bigger thing.
So I think my entry point to your work was Bait. I remember seeing it at the BFI and being really blown away by it. But I remember looking at the credits and being like, oh, this guy's done everything. So
yeah.
How important is that to you? Because I think I feel a bit of kinship with Scared to Dance, where I wear many hats and do many different jobs to keep the show on the road.
Yeah.
But also, which is out of necessity, but also as it's gone on for 17 years, I've sort of come to cherish it more. I think it becomes like more of your baby, and you become very protective and very selective about what you do and don't want to do.
I was really conscious of it when I was younger. When I wanted to be taken seriously as a filmmaker, I would, you go through that period where you're making films to start with, and it's like written by, directed by, produced by, shot by, edited by, starring, and every credit, and you want every credit. And then at some point you'll be watching your film with an audience, and you'll see all of your name going by, and suddenly you have that moment where you go, actually, this looks really unprofessional. Mm. And I went from, at that point, I would call myself a filmmaker, and every credit was kind of me.
Right.
And I thought, no, to be taken seriously, I need to be a director, or at most a writer-director. So then some of my films from that period, I've got pseudonyms for the cinematographer and the editor and stuff like that. And now I'm in the period where I've gone back to, I just give my credits that I've done, the jobs that I've done, I credit them to me, and I'm happy now going back to calling myself a filmmaker. Mm. I'm a filmmaker, because I'm not pretending that I work in a conventional way. Mm. But the thing is, like Rosa Nevada's got, you sat through the end, presumably you sat through the end credits.
Yeah.
There's like 140 people on there. And I know it's a cliche, but the film couldn't have been made with all of those people. So I get all of that headline attention, which is fine. Love it. But there's a paradox. Mm. I can be my own cinematographer on a film that I'm also directing, but I can only be my own cinematographer if I've got my first AC, my second AC, a couple more assistants, John Crooks, my gaffer, who's a genius, and his team. That allows me to give myself the credit as cinematographer, but they're all completely essential. So what I do, I'm now quite happy to embrace it. So yeah, I do all of this stuff. It's no longer out of necessity. It's out of a love for all of those roles. So I think now I turned 50 a couple of months ago, and I think what I've done now is I've got to that stage in my career where I've gone, I found a way of working that replicates the excitement and the enthusiasm I had when I was a teenager, where I was doing everything. And now it appears I'm doing everything. I'm not doing everything. I've got this huge team that I work with, but I get to do the bits that I love doing. And that happens to be almost every department. So I love writing. I love directing. I love editing. I also love shooting. You know, film is about the camera. So many filmmakers hide the fact that there's a camera involved, you know, and you start noticing the formal language of film, that film somehow failing, which I just think, oh, grow up. So everybody knows it's a film. Celebrate the mechanics and the form of filmmaking. The film starts with the camera. The actors are the most important people on a film, but the audience don't get to see the actors unless the camera is there. So everything's about the camera for me. And so I want to be operating the camera. You know, that is this beautiful thing that captures the magic of cinema. So I'm not kind of, you know, I celebrate that now rather than it being something out of necessity. It's become something completely out of design, to the point where I'll go into meetings now and people say, what, you know, execs will say, what do you want to do next? And I'll pitch a film and they say, how are you going to make it? And I'll say, well, you know, I don't do this anymore. But on the last one, I was like, well, I'll obviously use a cinematographer and I'll get an editor in and we'll record location sound, which I don't normally do. And they were like, why? And in my head, I'm thinking, well, isn't that how I have to do it now? But they're kind of saying, no, we want to finance your film because of the way you make it, not despite the way you make it. So I'm in a very sort of privileged position now.
It's a very good spot to be in.
It's great, but I think I had to go through 30 years of working in all sorts of different ways to get to this point, you know. And I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that the bait didn't break out until it did. I remember meeting up with a potential manager in LA a few years ago, and he said to me, you know, he said, how do you feel getting this? So Bait had come out, and I think Ennis Main had maybe just about come out, yeah. And the Ennis Main had come out in America. And so I went and had this meeting. This manager said to me, how do you feel having this success so late in your life? And I was like 47. But in LA, you know, that's, you know, I might as well have been 300 years old.
Considered late, is it?
No, but at the time it was just, you know, because I was in my sort of mid to late 40s, maybe a little bit sensitive about my age, hearing this guy who's exactly the same age as me saying, you know, how do you feel about having this? He'd had 3 careers by then. Right. But I thought, yeah, that's really interesting that this is the right time to get to this point. I wouldn't have got to this point without going through all of that. And the best conversations I have at the moment are with young people who say, you know, that I've inspired them just to make films in the way that they feel they should make films, you know, because I think when you're young, you sort of think you're trying to keep up with what everybody else is doing. And sometimes you can then end up miles away from what you actually enjoy doing, which is what I ended up doing. You know, I loved operating the camera. I loved editing. I loved doing the sound. But because I thought, oh no, I've got to make films in a proper way, I'd started going away from that idea of being a filmmaker and go, no, I've got to be a writer-director, so I've got to collaborate with all these people and hand over all of this responsibility to other people. And actually what I ended up doing was the bit of filmmaking that I didn't like as much as the other bits, you know? And so I think now when young people, a guy came up to me after the screening last night who was really emotional, and he said, you know, you've really given me faith to sort of follow, you know, and he was saying, I can't tell you how much your films mean to me. And that was so, and it's not necessarily the films or the content, but the fact they exist. And these films, you know, films that are being made in such a sort of, from the outside, a batshit crazy way, are actually being backed and being watched and being, you know, and getting and positively reviewed and getting relatively successful in terms of sort of box office. So I think that's, you know, and then I think back to the directors who, when I was that age, say in my early 20s, that I was looking to, I never met any of them. But there were certainly those directors who were totally uncompromising, but they were, you know, it wasn't until they were older that they got that kind of acclaim, I think.
What was it like when you first started getting backed with Bait? I mean, I was reading that it took 17 years for it to get off the ground. So if you can just tell us a little bit about what those 17 years were like, and then what was the jumping off point where you did get backing? Obviously, you work very closely with the BFI. If you can just tell us a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, well, we didn't have any backing, and I try and say this without sounding like I'm bitter or I told you so, but I'm so glad we kind of didn't get backing, because we made a film that is a black and white 16mm hand processed film about Cornish fishermen. You can't go into see some execs and pitch that film and come out with any money. You'd be lucky if you even get to sit down. You know, if you walk in and pitch that idea, I wouldn't back that idea. We had to make that film in order to prove that film would work. And that's fine. I mean, if I was still in development with it, maybe or if we'd done it and it failed, maybe I'd be a bit more bitter about it. So it's easy to say it because everything that's happened since then has been great. But I think it was kind of a blessing that we didn't have to go through a process where we had to compromise things. Because once we'd finished Bait, it was like, I said it in my BAFTA acceptance speech. Thank you to BFI Distribution for believing in a black and white 16mm post-sync film about Cornish fishermen, because they saw the commercial value of it once we'd made it.
Right.
We tried all of the normal routes to get it financed, but we just couldn't get it financed. And in the end, I worked with two brilliant producers, Kate Byers and Lynn Waite from Early Day Films, who just had some development money for something else that was being developed with their company. And they kind of just felt like me. They just said, should we just make it? Should we just use that development money for this other thing and go, this is how much money we've got. Can we make Bait in the way that you want to do it? Shot on film, post-synced, everything. Hand processed, keep all the costs down and hopefully make something unique in the process. And it was their sort of vision and their backing of me that allowed us to get it made. But I mean, it had been, I was living in London from 99 to 2002, working as a promo producer. And I moved back to Cornwall and got some money to write in Easter 2002. And I started writing a film called The Holiday Park, which then became a film called Shooting the String, which then became a film called The Suicide String, which then went back to being called Shooting the String, which eventually became Bait. A really good friend of mine was producing it for a while. A woman called Laura Hardman, brilliant woman, Loz, who very suddenly died. And I thought that was the end of the film. It was like a massive loss personally and for, a lot of people in my sort of community and friendship group. And I kind of thought the film had gone with her in a way. And I didn't go anywhere near it for a long time. And it was quite, it was kind of mine and hers film for up until that point. And it took a long time to sort of go back to it in a way. And what happened was that myself and Denzel Monk, who's my regular producer, we decided to make a film called Bronco's House, which is the precursor to Bait. It's 44 minutes long. It's made in exactly the same way as Bait. It's all shot in a Cornish harbour village, and it's about a guy trying to get a house before his child is born. He's homeless, and him and his girlfriend are trying to put a roof over their heads. And myself and Denzel did a crowdfunder and raised £6,000, and we made it. I hand processed it all, and that was the proof of concept for Bait, really. Denzel went off to do another project, and I was working with Kate and Lynn, and they saw Bronco's House and said, well, how about doing Bait, or Shooting the String as it was called then? How about turning that into a feature film and do it the same way as Bronco's House? And so that's where it was reinvigorated and kind of and came back at that point. So it was a long process, like you say. That my first idea for that film was in August 1999. I came up with the idea. The first draft was written in 2002. We shot draft 42 of the screenplay, and then from that first idea to the premiere at the Berlinale in 2019 was pretty much 20 years, and it wasn't like I worked on it every day. But it was this film that was always there. No matter what I was doing in my life, I was working on that film one way or another, even if it was the years where I wasn't doing anything. It was still there. And I remember saying to Mary, my partner, after Berlin, it was like, you know, we were at the train station getting the midnight train out of Berlin, having been there for five days, and it had all blown up and everything had gone crazy. And I remember being at the train station just saying to Mary, something, I don't know what it is, but something's changed. We're going home and the situation is different. And it was, and I thought, I did wonder who am I now? Because from the age of, how old was I in 99? I would have been 23. From 23 to age 43, I'd been effectively making this one film, and now it was done and it was out in the world. It was like, well, what now? You know, was that the thing that was driving me forward all the time? People always said to me, did you always know it was going to be successful? I was like, well, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think subconsciously I must have known, else I wouldn't have stuck with it all the time. But there is an alternative world where I'm still developing that film, you know? So it was, I think that film will define me forever. I remember meeting with Bobby Allen from Mubi. I hope I can say this, not confidential, but I mean, he said to me, we went in for a meeting and he said to me, do you realise what you've done with Bait? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, you've made a film that's kind of broken through. That will be there forever. Whatever you do afterwards, that will always be there. And it was like, wow, that's kind of, you know, there's so many directors who've made one film and are known for one film. And it's kind of enough, you know, and everything else is a bonus. So it's such a defining thing. Last night, Invader were doing the merch stall at the IMAX selling the records, and so many people when I was signing records I was signing Rose of Nevada vinyl, but there was Bait vinyl for sale, and so many people were saying that's the moment, you know, and that was the audience saying that to me, and I was like, yeah, that's the moment for me, you know, that's, you know, I look at that image which is the poster that Dion, the original screen print that Dion did, you know, for Bait when we didn't even have a premiere or anything. I look at that image and think, yeah, that's kind of locked in time, you know, that's kind of there forever, and I never take that for granted.
So how did it feel for you after that huge period of time making Bait, and then it goes out into the world, gets distribution from BFI, and starts getting amazing reviews? How did you feel personally?
Great.
Just relief or happy or overwhelmed?
Oh yeah, I mean, totally overwhelmed. We were in Berlin. So me and Mary got the train to Berlin, and it took like 3 days. So I mean, it's a day to get to London. We stayed in London, stayed with Emma, Mary's sister, in East London, and I remember the first press screening was going on in Berlin, and Kate and Lynn, the producers, were already in Berlin. They were at the press screening, and I remember messaging them saying, "How's it going?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, it's okay. There's not many here, but you know, there's never many in these screenings, you know," really softening the blow for me. And then we got to Berlin and we went to the hotel, and then opposite the hotel was the Delphi Theatre where Bait was going to premiere. And we were getting changed. We had about an hour before we had to go and introduce it. And I remember looking out and there's crowds everywhere. I was thinking, oh, I wonder what else is on at the Delphi. And then we got dressed and we went across the road to do the introduction. We were queued up with all the crowds. And then somebody from the film just was at the door saying, quick, come in. And so we skipped the queue thinking, oh God, trying to sort of say, oh no, we're not going to your film. We're going to our little film. I said, what else is playing here tonight? And they were like, what do you mean? I said, what's in the main screen? It's like, this is single screen theatre. They're all here for Bait. And I was like, oh my God, you know. So we went in, I don't know how many seats it was, like 800 or whatever. I remember doing the introduction to this huge room, and then I noticed the balcony, which is about another 50% on the balcony. I'd never been in a cinema that big, let alone at the world premiere of my film. And then what happens is when the film's on, the first look reviews come out. So as you walk out of the screening, the phone's going mad because people are saying, oh, I've just so-and-so's review. And this was all new to me, you know, and I was there with a publicist. And I said, no, we didn't have a publicist for this film. I can't remember who it was, but somebody just said, oh, Peter Bradshaw's reviewed it. And I was like, oh wow, what's it like? And they were like, this amazing review. And then from then it went crazy. Then all the press screenings were then sold out or full. They had to put on extra press screenings. All of our screenings completely sold out. They put on extra public screenings for the film, and it was just like we were just in an absolute whirlwind. And it was just, I remember I've got used to bigger hotels now, but I'd never been in a hotel like this before, where it wasn't a suite, but we had like an ante room. So you walked in, and then we had this little ante room, then the bedroom, and then the bathroom. And it was the day after the premiere, and I was just getting dressed because I was going off to do interviews. Suddenly there was all this press, and so I was getting dressed to go off to do an interview. Mary was getting dressed in the bedroom. I was in the little ante room looking in the mirror, and my phone was just going ding, 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 you know. I'd never seen, it was on Twitter at the time, you know, which I'm not anymore, but I'd never seen it where you get a notification where it gets to 20 notifications, it just says 20 and then a plus symbol. I'd never, so that's weird. It doesn't count up past 20. I'd never had 20 notifications before. And every time I cleared them, it would just go up again, and it was just these messages, and it was all positive. And I find it quite difficult to talk about, but I got this message. And Mary was talking to me, and my voice went funny, like it's going now. And she said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I just got this message on Twitter." And she said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was looking in the mirror because I was kind of getting ready. And I said, "Yeah, I feel happy, but I look sad, and I think I'm about to cry." And it was this German guy on Twitter who had like 20 followers, but he said, it just said, "If you're going to see one film in Berlin this week, go and see Bait." And I just thought it was the one that hit me, that it was this guy who just chosen to write this tweet and put it out in the world because he'd seen our little film. And that was the one that absolutely got me. And that was, totally overwhelming. And it was like that the whole festival. Like I said, I'll never forget it, and I'll never take it for granted. You know, I'd still find it so emotional talking about it. I remember telling that story in the Q&A that night at the next screening. What an idiot! Because I started crying before I started telling the story. So I start saying, "Oh, I was in the hotel earlier," and then I start crying. It's like, who's this guy that everybody's sort of talking about? He's an emotional wreck. But it was so overwhelming. Like I say, you know, on the way back, me and Mary were at the train station, sat on our bags on the platform, getting the midnight train home. And it was just like, something's changed here. This is nuts. We were getting, you know, we walked from the theatre to the train station, and people were stopping us in the street. And it was just full on.
So with Rosa Nevada, what was it like working with a much bigger crew? I noticed in the credits you had people from Falmouth University, like even like work experience on it. So how was that for you as a filmmaker compared to Bates?
Well, in some ways it was no different, because what I do day to day when we're making the film is I'm directing it and I'm operating the camera. So if you'd wandered onto set when I was shooting, it would be exactly the same. It's just me wandering around with a camera in my hand, a light meter around my neck, and a bag of rolls of film, and then a couple of assistants. Where it gets bigger is in the sort of support around that. So as I mentioned before, John Crook's my gaffer on the film. He had a much bigger team. The art department was much bigger because it was it's a period film because it's set in 1993, or some of it's set in 1993. So the art department's much bigger. There's a huge construction team because we built the below deck space of the boat. That was all in the studio, which was a big warehouse in Cornwall. So the interior of the boat was built on a gimbal that could be rocked backwards and forwards. So that, and some of the locations were built as well. So like the narrow sort of alleyway where the two houses, the front of the two houses are, that's that's a studio build. So there was a huge construction team, huge art department, a much bigger lighting team. And then production, in terms of like Denzel, the producer, and all of his team, there was a much bigger department there. But from my experience, it was really no different. We had a lot of students on placements, so I don't know the exact figures, but each department had a load of students that would come in and do a 5-day stretch, and then new students the following Monday. So it was a huge turnover of students, and then a much bigger crew in general. But we wanted to keep it the same, you know. We wanted to keep that feel the same, and we scaled it up where it needed to be scaled up, but we didn't scale up for the sake of scaling it up.
When did the writing begin for Rose of Nevada?
It started before I shot Ennis Main.
Okay, right.
Yeah, because we were getting ready to shoot Ennis Main in the spring of 2020, and then there was COVID, so we were shut down for a year. So I wrote Rose of Nevada during the lockdown, the first draft at least. I had an idea, which is the first scene of the film with the boat turning up in the harbour 30 years after it was lost at sea with all the crew gone. And I'd had that idea for ages. And so I needed to write something during the lockdown. I just thought, well, this will be a good time to write something. But I didn't have any ideas because I was so focused on doing Ennis Main at that point. I wasn't in that space of thinking about what to do next. And I pitched that first scene to Mary one night, and she said, "Where does it go after that? What happens?" I said, I don't know. I've never known what happens after that. It seems like so self-contained. And she said to me, "What happens if when the boat comes back, not everybody in the community is entirely surprised that the boat's come back?" And that's when it opened it up for me, because then it stopped being a mystery about a boat coming back. It started to be more about a mystery about why people weren't surprised it had come back. And then it becomes a human story rather than a supernatural story. And then I wrote it from there, which I thought, you know, we batted ideas backwards and forwards until I had the plot, and then I tried to write it, and that's where it gets really difficult, because it's really difficult to write a time travel movie because of all the issues around quantum physics, which I'm not completely all over really. So that's why there's just one time slip, but that time slip throws out hopefully lots of different possibilities of where the film ends up, because the ending is quite open.
Yeah. And it stars George MacKay and Callum Turner. Did you have those actors in mind when you were writing it, or was there more of a casting process? Yeah,
casting process. I try not to think of anybody when I'm writing it, because one, I don't want to be influenced too much by who the actors are and what they've done before. But also, I don't want to be in that situation where I've written something for somebody and spent 2 years writing it, and then you send the agent the script, and then the agent comes back and says no, and you go, oh, great. I don't want that heartbreak, so I don't get attached to people ahead of that. I might think of like archetypes, but not specific actors. But we worked with Shaheen Baig, our casting director, who put together this fantastic short list, and the first name that jumped out was George. So I met with George to play the character that Callum eventually played, because I thought George was too old to play Nick, the lead character, because I imagined him to be a lot younger than Liam, the character that Callum ended up playing. But as soon as I met George, I thought he's got to play Nick. And actually, he looks old and young at the same time. He's timeless, but he's got this look that I think you can't help but empathise with him. You go with him, you kind of trust him, you know that he's a pure soul, and that's what that needed. And then from there, I met Callum. I really liked Callum in a TV series years ago on E4 called Glue, that I'd watched because I was looking at another actor for a different film that I was developing at the time, and I was just captivated by Callum, because I thought he played this very quiet, brooding, stable boy. It was a Jack Thorne E4 series, and I just couldn't take my eyes off him. And so when he was on the list, we met up and we spoke for an hour. We met for an hour at Shaheen's office, and we just talked about football. So then we had another meeting a few weeks later where we came back and actually talked about the film. But I think, the thing is with cast, I never get actors to read in front of me. I want them to read the script for their own process and everything, but I don't want them to sort of read a scene. I don't do that sort of audition process. I much prefer to meet up with somebody and talk about football for an hour with them, because I think you get an understanding who the person is, and a lot of it is about kind of getting on personally as well as the sort of professional. Kind of, and they're both great actors. Other people have, there's enough films out there for me to know that they can do it, but I want to know that we're going to get on and they're going to like me and I'm going to like them. So, and with Francis McGee, who plays Murgy in the film, again, I met up with him and we had a 1 hour meeting at the BFI, which went on for 2 hours. And we didn't talk about anything. We talked about our growing up. We didn't talk about anything about film. But I knew by the end, we sort of, as we went our separate ways, it was kind of like, do you want to do it? And he was like, do you want me to do it? I was like, I want you to do it. And he's like, I want to do it. And that was, and that was it. That was the only time we really spoke about the film. So, yeah, it's great, and it's a real cliche, but a great byproduct of making a film is you end up with new friends. Callum and George, we talk all the time, and they're still they're really, really special people, and I think that bears out my instinct is just to go with my gut, and hopefully they went with their gut as well, because they were really they were taking a big risk, really, doing something very new in terms of process, something they probably hadn't done before, but also jumping into a community that kind of already existed. They were kind of the outsiders. And George and Cal both joked about that they felt that they were almost like the new boyfriends at the wedding, who were, turning up and being introduced to everybody. They were kind of like the outsiders, but they were both so engaged with it. They both moved down with their families and stuff, and were in Cornwall for the full sort of 6 or 7 weeks. So I just think, I try not to think about anything ever. So I always follow my gut. In life, just never think, just follow your gut. Because I'm a big believer in the multiple brain theory, that you got the brain in your head and then you got the brain in the gut, and you listen to the brain in the gut, because the brain in the gut's the one that's there to keep you alive. And the one in your head is a prick that just complicates everything.
So obviously all of your films have Cornwall as its centre, and that's where you grew up in Newlyn.
Well, I grew up in North Cornwall.
Oh, in North Cornwall?
Yeah, but my family are all Newlyn or St Ives. Newlyn on my dad's side and St Ives on my mum's side. So
what were you listening to when you were growing up in your adolescent years?
Well, I got a sister. My sister Susanna is 4 years older than me. So when I was young, I had her music. So there's a lot of bands that I like that are kind of from... she introduced me to the Smiths, Pixies, The Cure, Half Man, Half Biscuit, off the top of my head, all of that kind of stuff. And then I suppose about 1990, I think is when, or late 80s, early 90s is when my generation, we got to that age where we started having our own music. So there's like some significant things like the first Stone Roses album. I loved the House Martins, and I loved the Beautiful South. I loved the first De La Soul album, was kind of massive around that time. And then it became, as it got to that age where it became really tribal, it then got very focused on what was going on in the Northwest, really. So it really was like the Happy Mondays, the Stone Roses, and then some other, like Paris Angels, New Fast Automatic Daffodils, who we feature in the films, playing on the jukebox in the pub, big. That was a massive single for me. And a lot of it was, there was a compilation tape called Happy Days that came out probably about 1990. And it was all sort of like the Manchester stuff, but then some random, it did have a Pixies track on it, and there's some kind of random stuff on it. Loaded by Primal Scream was the opening track. I think it was Wrote for Luck by the Mondays was on there. Great song. Yeah, that one, and I featured that tape in the film. It's one of the cassettes that's on the side in Luke's bedroom in the film. So that was the big thing for me, was that being really tribal about music at that point. And then when we went to sixth form college, we were on the North Coast, but the sixth form college was on the South Coast in St Austell. And most of the North Coast kids, the way I remember it is, were really sort of into British music. So it was like the Mondays and the Roses and Charlatans and Spiral Carpets and all that kind of stuff. And then so we're heading towards Britpop a little bit. So a bit of Suede and a bit of Blur, but very much, Blur when they were very anti-American and stuff. And then we would go down to college on the South Coast, and everybody down on the South Coast was into like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And so we were all sort of dressing smart, and they were all dressing like tramps. This is what my thinking at the time was. And then it turned out like loads, and they were dressing like they were really poor. And then it turns out they're the ones who were like, they've actually got loads of money.
Yeah.
But they're dressing like they're in Nirvana or Pearl Jam or whatever. And so like, and there used to be real like scuffles and fights at, parties and stuff that would delineate between North Coast and South Coast. And then gradually you get a bit older and, it all gets a bit mixed up and it gets less tribal. I remember being at a mate's place after, when we'd left college, I was just on the dole in North Cornwall, and one night, I remember it really well because it was the night that Eric Cantona did the Kung Fu kick at Crystal Palace, and we were watching it. It was like midweek match of the day or whatever, and I remember it was momentous because of that night. And I remember it's like been hosted by Des Lynam or somebody, and the program started and he said something like, before we watched the highlights tonight, something awful has happened at a football stadium. It was like really sort of serious. We were like, oh my God, what's happened? And then, they showed the Cantona thing, and we just, because we were that age, just thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
That was momentous. That was one momentous thing that night. The other momentous thing was I told my mate that night, I said, I've been listening to Nevermind by Nirvana, which was like, it's like coming out or something.
Yeah.
I said, I borrowed this tape and I've taped a copy of it, and I've listened to Nevermind by Nirvana, and it's really good. And he stood up, and I thought, oh, what's he going to say to me? And he went over to his chest of drawers, and he opened up a chest of drawers, and in the chest of drawers, away from his record collection, was 2 Simply Red records. And it was like Stars, was it called? And whatever the one before was. But he said, I listened to these are really good. And it was like this confessional thing. And it was kind of, in some ways, it was really a relief. But in other ways, it was like, is this the end of tribal music? But then, and then a couple of years later, it all kicked off again, and it was Blur v Oasis and all of that. And that became really tribal. So I was a massive Oasis fan and not a Blur fan, because you couldn't be both. And if you'd meet somebody who was both, and you go, well, you're an idiot then if you're both. You're not engaged in this if you're both.
It's quite funny looking back on it, isn't it, really? Because
Yeah.
I grew up, I'd have been 10, 11, 12, around sort of Britpop time.
Yeah.
And I was Team Oasis.
Yeah.
But I like Blur too. But you just look back on it, just how stupid.
But how stupid, but how incredible. It was
Yeah,
the main,
well,
I mean,
because it felt really important.
what was it? Country House and Roll With It.
Yeah.
That was the main headline news that night.
News at 10.
Yeah. And that was for that pop culture to be there. So now when people say to me, people say, oh, Oasis are rubbish or whatever. And I've got people who would say that to me. I just always think, but you weren't there. It wasn't just about music. It was about what was happening culturally. It was so exciting that it was so sort of, I remember I was in a band when I was at university in Bournemouth, and we used to rehearse above a pub called the Dolphin. And we used to have to stop rehearsing when the pub shut, and they always used to play Don't Look Back in Anger on the jukebox. Somebody would put it on, and the whole pub would sing it like a football crowd when we were taking the drum kit out of the upstairs room. And that was just normal at the time. I think back at it now, that was incredible.
Yeah.
And it is rose-tinted spectacles, because I always remember it being sunny and everything was positive. But there was I was 19, 20 years old at that point. It was, the writing was on the wall for the Tory government. We were just about to finally get a Labour government. We had this incredible music scene going on that was not a subculture, it was the culture. That was so exciting. So you can't separate the music and the feeling at the time. So I'm writing something at the moment that's based in the 90s, like a coming of age story that's set between 1990 and 2003. And so much of it is about the music and how at that age you kind of change with the music. And I look back at that, I'm obsessed with that era, because it is also that era. It's that last great, and this isn't a comment about the internet or, damning it or whatever, but it's that great big subcultural, cultural movement. The last one that was pre-internet, really, pre-widespread internet.
So is that likely to be your next film?
Possibly. There's meetings going on as we speak.
Okay.
About it. So, which I'm probably not allowed to talk. Well, I won't talk about it anymore. But yeah, hopefully it'll be the next one. Yeah.
Well, I always ask one final question on the podcast. You're obviously a big music fan. What have you listened to in the last year that you could recommend?
What, that's new?
Either new or something old that you've discovered.
Oh, I've just been listening. This might be because I've just turned 50, but I've been listening to a lot of Paul Weller in the last couple of days. I'm just thinking, I've finally got digital music. God, that makes me sound like a granddad, doesn't it? I finally got, I got sent a playlist by a friend of mine who's a very famous musician, and it was an Apple playlist, and I thought, he sent me this. I've got to listen to it, so I'm gonna do a free trial with Apple Music. And I thought, and then I'll just cancel it. But of course, you never do that. That's why they give you the free trial, isn't it? I thought I was cleverer than them, but they're cleverer than me. So I've been listening to stuff. I've been very privileged to hear the new Alex Rex album, Alex Nielsen, from Trembling Bells. Alex Rex, his new record that isn't out yet. He sent me that, and I've been listening to that. That is an incredible record. I'm not quite sure, later in the year that comes out. I've loved Gweno's, your previous guest, Gweno. Everything she does is just brilliant. She's miles ahead of everybody. In fact, I was late checking out the hotel earlier. I was in a real hurry, and I picked my phone up to check what time it was, and I had Instagram on, and it was playing a reel of her playing her single Utopia, and I just stood and watched it and listened to it, because it's just incredible. And it made me even later, but it was like, sod it, it's worth it. This is, so anything Gweno does, anything Alex does, I mean, they're the two for me at the moment. I should have thought about this more, but yeah, I'm sort of just, I've been listening to the first Ride album as well, actually, over the last few days, because now I've got Apple Music. I'm kind of listening to stuff that I had on cassette that I never bought on CD. So this is kind of weird. I'm jumping back into the 90s again. And I was listening to Nowhere, walking over to the IMAX yesterday, just to calm myself down, a bit of shoegaze. That album is just an absolute masterpiece. And a mate of mine, Chris, in New York, messaged me and said, I'm just watching this performance of Ride on YouTube. And I don't think he was ever into them. But he said, they're incredible. And I was listening to it at the same time. It was like, there's something in the air there.
Hey, big thanks to Mark Jenkin for joining me on the show today. Rose of Nevada is now available to watch on BFI Player, and you can also buy the film on Blu-ray and DVD alongside his Cornish trilogy box sets. Coming up at Scared to Dance, we have The Last Dinner Party guest DJing at the club on Saturday the 5th of September at the George Tavern, and we also have DJ sets from Prima Queen, Jack Shep, Anya Magliano, and one of our previous guests on the podcast, Ellis James. I'll be back next week when I'll be talking to Matilda Mann about her excellent new album, Kismet. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast was produced at Third Floor Recording.